So thank you, Ian Anderson, for joining me in on uh, a speech that I'll be doing in November on cats and music. And the topic is basically how some of my classic rockers, timeless rockers, have been involved with uh, spreading the good word about cat rescue as well as other causes. And I'd love to know, first of all, one or two stories about favorite cats that you adopted from a rescuer or that you yourself might have rescued that inspired you creatively or professionally.
Well, back around 19, actually, come to think of it, it goes back all the way to probably about 1952
Mm.
when we adopted a stray cat. Well, actually, he adopted us, and he was a Tom. He wasn't neutered, and he was a fierce character with half an ear missing, and he was a real fighter. But he had a soft side to him, and he used to come and regularly visit, and he ended up living in our house relatively harmoniously, and he was called Smudge, and I was about 5 years old, and I remember him not being very popular with my parents because he was very scruffy and could be quite aggressive. But to me, as a 5 year old, he was always very gentle and very, very nice. I don't know what happened to him because he was probably quite old, maybe just passed away somewhere along the line. But that was my first experience of having a cat. And fast forward many years to when my wife and I got married and we were living out in the countryside of Buckinghamshire. And in our farm buildings, somebody had either dumped a stray female cat or she'd found her way there. But we got the message that there were some kittens in the farm building, hiding in amongst the hay bales at the back of the big shed. And so I went down there and realized that they couldn't really be caught without the aid of some heavy duty leather gloves because they were hissing, spitting, fighting little things, only about 5 weeks old.
Sure.
But I managed to catch, I think, seven of them. And they all turn out to be really, really good cats. We kept one or two. And the next year, and I think the year after that, we also got more cats from our farm buildings. And I think we eventually managed to trap the female and had her spayed. But we had a lot of really good pals out of those litters of very feral kittens. The mother you couldn't get near. We had to put a proper cat trap and get her and take her to a vet to be operated on. I guess she would have been hopping mad at being caught because she wouldn't let anybody go near her. But the
Yeah.
kittens, once, you had to persevere, and we realized that it would take probably 3 to 4 weeks when maybe they could be 8 or 9 weeks old and they would be used to being handled and used to being very much increasingly dependent on humans to feed them, to pet them, show them care and attention. And we found willing homes for them. And then when we moved home some years later to where we live now, my wife got a call to say there were a litter of kittens in a friend's barn. And we got another seven kittens out of that, all of which we found homes for, apart from one who was the little runt of the litter. She didn't look like she was going to make it. She was half the size of the other ones and wasn't feeding, and we really had to work very, very hard to save her. And she was with us until the age of about 18 when she finally died. And
Nice.
she was always very, very tiny. and she was very cantankerous. She hated our other cats, and they hated her. So it was not a harmonious relationship. Fine with us, but not fine with the other animals. She used to hiss and spit at them when they weren't really doing anything bad, and so the animosity grew. And I learned from that they're all so individual. Those feral cats. Some of them can be quite easily tamed, some of them can't. And I think that in terms of rescue cats, of course, there are lots of very well-meaning bodies who take in stray cats, old cats, unwanted cats. Following COVID, there's a huge amount of cats got dumped because during COVID, people thought, "Oh, let's get a cat," and
Yeah,
so there's a huge increase in cat ownership, if indeed you can ever own a cat. But then people either found out they didn't want a cat after all, or they just couldn't cope, or they had to go back to work. And so a lot of cats seem to appear in the rescue homes as a result of the not the end of COVID, but the reduction of COVID to the point where people carried on with their usual employment and usual habits. So I think the same thing happens after Christmas. You get in sort of
mm,
January, February, March, a lot of cats that have been purchased in the midst of the fever of the holiday season. Suddenly they realize they can't cope, and cats get given back or given away
yeah,
to homes. Which I mean, having a cat is like having a human child. It's a great responsibility, and you shouldn't really be going into that unless you've really thought it through and
agreed.
make the decision with all the knowledge that you can these days very easily find on the internet, and be aware of the responsibilities. Also be aware of the actual cost involved, because cats are not for nothing. Cats
No,
don't do well on human scraps. You have to buy cat food. You have to look after them. You have to take them to the vet. You have to get them neutered. You have to pay the vet's bills for the annual injections and all the things that go with it. So, having a cat is not as expensive as a human baby, but it certainly doesn't come for nothing. And again, I think you've got to weigh in mind the financial obligation that you're taking on before you get a cat. And certainly, whether you live in the middle of a city or whether you live in the open country like we do, I think having cats neutered is an absolute necessity, and something that is a matter of great responsibility. And in terms of the cats, it usually means that they become a little more compliant and tame and happy, sharing their homes with people, whereas particularly males, if they're not neutered, become
mm-hmm.
more than just a handful and can quite often be quite nasty.
You're talking about a commitment, which is a parallel in being an artist and developing relationships, and it's a part of empathy, having feelings and concern and care for another animal. Or
Yes, and it also applies in not so much in my country, but particularly in the USA and in other
mm,
countries too, with people acquiring exotic pets and
oh,
acquiring animals that really have no place being in human habitation or human ownership. At best, they might be responsibly in a very appropriate zoo, and not all zoos are,
mm-hmm,
but they certainly don't belong in as being possessions, exotic possessions in an average family household. But people in many years gone by would have pet lions and tigers and ocelots and things that
right,
look pretty and were exotic. That died out in my country. I mean, you have to, under the Dangerous Wild Animals Act, you have to have a special license to have a wild animal of any sort, whether it's a snake or a lizard or a kangaroo or a koala bear or indeed any of the wildcat species, big and small. And you have to have an enormous amount of detailed facility set
Yeah.
aside for them, which isn't just about so many square meters. It's also about, again, the regular inspection by the authorities who come and check your your actual space, your cages, your enclosures, and again, it's people going into that really need to be aware they've got to throw a lot of money at that job of keeping exotic pets. And basically, I tend to be against it
Well,
right across the board. I don't really feel it has a place anywhere. And the place for animals, wild animals, is in the wild. And there are only a very few occasions when animals have been either kept as exotic pets, sent off to some sanctuary or somewhere else, and then maybe then given on to somewhere more suitable to look after them for their lifetimes. And indeed,
we
I've
had,
been contacted in the past, with people asking me, would I be prepared to take on um, wildcats of this or that species? And, I've thought it through and decided that I really couldn't devote that time and commitment because I'm a working guy. I travel around and
right.
I feel that you really do have to be accepting that huge amount of responsibility and commitment long term to look after wild animals who, after all, it is only marginally better than going to jail. Keeping
We
any
were,
animal in an
yeah,
enclosure that it might satisfy the authorities as to being at least the minimum size for the animal in question, but that's not the same as having many, many square miles to roam over, to hunt for prey, to do the things that wild animals do. And I've turned down those offers. But on one occasion, when it involved somebody who had a real enthusiast for Felis sylvestris, the Scottish wildcat,
mm-hmm,
the he was pretty sure, this is somebody keeping animals up in the Highlands, he was pretty sure that he had some purebred wildcat cubs that were, I guess, a few months old. I think there were four or five animals, and he just couldn't cope with the expense of what he was already doing, but he couldn't afford the ongoing upkeep and all of
right.
the expense of maintaining these and the vet's bills and the inspections and everything that goes with it, having a license for wild animals. And so he sought my help in finding a home for them. And indeed, I managed to make a couple of calls and got them sent down to Port Lim Zoo in the south of England, which, amongst other animals, does have a long tradition of looking after wild cats and particularly small wildcat species. So I funded the building of a new enclosure for these Scottish wildcats that went down to hopefully live out their days at Port Lim Zoo in Hampshire. And I've also been involved a little bit on the sidelines with efforts uh, to try to save the dwindling and very threatened small population of Scottish wildcats in the Highlands of Scotland. And
Mm-hmm.
indeed, there are some that are being held at Edinburgh Zoo, which I visited. In fact, I went there to give a lecture about wildcats, having been asked to go along. And there's an associate body in the Highlands at another wildlife park where they have just successfully bred some Scottish wildcats that they had, and so there are some. I guess now they're probably 6 months old because they're
You've,
cute and cuddly. When they're only 3 or 4 or 5 weeks old, they don't know any better. But most first generation wild cats, big and small, at around
mm-hmm,
6 to 8 months of age, their their wild genes begin to exert their influence on the animal,
Oh,
and it's
sure.
no longer it it may have a something of a bond with its immediate human companions, but it will not be tame. It won't be cuddly. It won't be something you can that sleeps at the bottom of your bed, or you can, take it out for a walk and go to the supermarket and let it choose what it wants to eat. That's out of the question. It will become, to all intents, pretty wild, and if it's big enough, it will hurt you, as
Yeah.
indeed Siegfried and Roy found.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at least Roy did, having his head more or less nearly bitten off by one of his tame, wonderful, beautiful tigers that were on show
Yeah.
in a Las Vegas hotel. And I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sorry
Well,
to hear about what happened to him, but you shouldn't be doing that, cashing in on keeping wild animals and all the oohs and ahs aren't they beautiful. I mean, it came back to bite him very seriously.
literally. Yeah.
And
Not to mention the inbreeding that they did to those animals.
Well, and
I
and all the fake stuff that goes on about conservation too, because the people see that as the green card. Oh well, we're involved in conservation. We give so much money to the conservation bodies and releasing things back into the wild. Blah 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 blah. Yeah, while you're charging $300 a ticket to punters to come and see these things, it's
yeah.
it's it's iniquitous, and I would hope that it served as some sort of a lesson to others to that the days of wild animals in zoos is almost over, thank goodness. But I can remember as a child, it wasn't at that point unusual to see captive lions and tigers in traveling zoos. In my country, that's no
And
longer
circuses,
permitted,
yeah.
no longer the case.
Met the big cat rescue, which was originally Wildlife on Easy Street in Florida through you and the work that they've been doing. And there are a couple of sanctuaries kindred to them. And yeah, to a certain degree, because the cats don't completely roam around super free like we see in Kroger Park, South Africa, um, or
Yes,
other
I mean and
places.
the one you're referring to in Florida. I mean, I've visited that facility too, and and I've spoken to some of the cats up close and personal, but you can tell whether it's a bobcat or a puma, mountain lion, you would call it. It will tolerate you. It will sit next to you. It will allow you to sort of interface with it up to a point, but you can tell that it's not really that happy, and it doesn't really feel like any kind of a bonding, in the way that you might bond with a feral cat in the middle of some holiday venue city.
Hmm.
Because I meet lots of cats when I go on vacation, and usually, I mean, they're either terrified, depending on whether waiters have kicked them when they hung around restaurants or hotels, or whether they've been kindly treated, in which case they're quite friendly to humans. But one of the first things I do whenever I go on holiday is to visit a supermarket and go and buy some dry cat food so I can carry some around in my pocket, because I do find, you make temporary friends, perhaps for 2 or 3 days staying in a hotel, and you get some little guy that comes and
Sure.
visits you and gets a little feed, and hopefully the next occupants of that room might be compliant as well. But it those cats are feral domestic cats. Some of them indeed are opportunists. They actually have a bed to go to at night, but they just wander during the day and hang around, the fancy restaurants and hotels where they might get a bit of lobster, as opposed to
Hmm.
that 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 well-meaning guy, the old guy with a bald head, who gives us dry cat food, which we pretend to enjoy, but he means well. But we'd much rather have a piece of lobster or a nice piece of flying fish, please.
You have some nice insight in connecting with animals. Are they in any way cats? How might they be inspiring to you as an artist or
Well, I've always marveled at cats since I was a very small child. I found the fascination was largely because of their independence, the fact that they would choose when they wanted to be friendly. And I learned very early on as a small child that if they didn't feel particularly friendly in that moment, there was no point in pushing it. There was no point in trying to force the issue. You know, you
Mm,
just had to accept that sometimes they were in the mood, sometimes they weren't. A bit like wives and girlfriends. You know, you just have to be respectful and realize that just because you happen to feel, a little amorous and friendly, it doesn't necessarily, it's not the right time for your companion, either whether human or feline. Dogs, on the other hand, I mean, they're just friendly all the time. That's why I'm not really a doggy person because there's no mystery about dogs. You know, they
mm,
always want to be wagging their tail and being friendly. And it's we have a very big dog, a big Belgian Shepherd dog, a Tervuren. We've had several Tervurens in the last 40 years, and one of the great things is they all really get on with our cats and vice versa. And so, they will hang out together, they will sleep in the same bed, they will come and lie on the floor together. They're really, really good friends. And if anybody's thinking of getting a cat and would like a dog, I can heartily recommend the Belgian Shepherds,
mm.
at least the Tervuren and the Grunendahl. Not the scary one that is used by the military and the police, which is a real handful. But the Tervuren and the Grunendahl, they are, in my experience, very, very good with children, very, very good with all the families. As soon as they recognize family members or people who come regularly, they're really, super friendly dogs. But they also love cats. And that's to me very rewarding when you can go out in the evening. If it's a warm and pleasant evening as it is tonight,
Yeah.
you can go for a walk around the garden with a cat and a dog, and it's part of sharing something that I think is a very special bond. So that's good. That's good having that relationship. But it's the independence and the general aloofness that some cats will show from time to time that makes them fascinating. And you value all the more those times when they are in a friendly mood and they do want to come and sleep on your face.
Oh, yeah.
So it's one of those things again, accepting that little bit of mystery that goes with a relationship of that sort.
So there are parallels in business, such as the music world. And I have three different theories about why cats or animals are like business. One is a Warren Buffett quote where he deals with the passion from animals, that there might be high motivation, and he called it the animal motivation. The other is uh, a theory about being animalistic, such as the lizard brain. And then finally, success based on similar feelings, neural responses, where you find your team of people that speak your language, you find your cat colony or litter. So there's three different theories that I came across. Do you know which one might relate more to your observations and what has transpired in your career through the years?
Well, for me, it is the relative independence and the wariness, the solitary nature of cats that I take as a model for myself, really. I
Mm.
mean, probably I would anyway, but maybe that's something I share with cats because I'm a loner. I don't like being in crowds of a lot of people. It's for me, one to one is okay. Two people plus me is getting a little busy. Three is definitely a crowd, and I don't like crowds. I'm just very much happy to be by myself, and I like that sense of taking on that rather feline spirit. But I would because I'm a Leo, And
That's leadership.
not that I'm terribly believing in that aspect of pseudoscience, but nonetheless there is a little more
Right.
than just coincidence attached to it, because I think in some ways, we can very easily relate, um, at least in my case, to the nature of that Leo. And if you're into numerology,
Hmm.
the 10, being born on the 10th of August, that makes me sort of almost like double Leo. 10 being quite an authoritative number in numerology. I mean, I
Right.
read these things, but it doesn't mean that I believe them, just like I read lots of things about comparative religion, about other religions. It doesn't mean that I believe them, but I'm interested in absorbing the knowledge and learning about what other
Sure.
people think. But I take them with either a pinch of salt or with a level of distance. I will think about it, ponder on it, and take from it what I can. But it's not something I will get sucked into and believe in. But
It's
there
an
is
ex
more than just a little more than just coincidence, I think,
Yeah.
about your star sign. It's a kind of a
It
little
it
fun.
it helps with self-exploration. And coincidentally, let me just bring up something because over the past year and a half, I've been reading up on Jimmy Dean, the pork sausage guy. You both, and but he was a very enterprising businessman and who created a lot of programs and things like that. You two share a birthday. So
Oh,
he's
right.
also,
Okay.
yeah, he was also a Leo and same August date. So there
Yeah.
you go.
Well, I've been sufficiently amused by cats to want to amuse other people on this topic by writing, I think, 3 or 4 songs in my life that have been about cats.
Hmm.
And I've, I find that the things that move me to write something that's a little bit more esoteric, a little bit more emotional, it's going to be cats or possibly trains, another topic that I have visited on more than one occasion. So the topic of cats is always one that interests me. And
Yeah.
one particular song called "And the Mouse Police Never Sleeps" is is one that I, from time to time, I think, yeah, I wish I could play that one live on stage. But it's a bit of a complex and difficult song, I think, to work live on stage. But it's one of those recordings that I think is one of my less well known but favorite tracks.
Yeah. Absolutely. One final question. The greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated. From Gandhi. You did talk about some of the careless things that we have done, different countries have done through the years, and when to reach out for help. In what way would kindness be uh, applied, and how can it be used to help uh, set people in the right way, finding supportive channels for uh, a country's success rather than building its cruelty?
Well, there are countries that it's pointless naming names or mentioning people,
Hmm.
because, of course, in those countries there are lots of people who abhor the treatment of animals. But there are many countries that have in the past, and some that still do, take threatened species, trap them, and sell them in exotic marketplaces where people pay a lot of money for perhaps reasons that are completely, I mean, maybe they are traditional medicine in some person's mind, but unfortunately, there's no scientific basis for any of that. It's just people following a rather superstitious need to breed, trap, kill exotic animals for either so-called traditional medicines or just because they fancy a barbecue. And
Yeah.
in terms of what you can do, well, you could first of all try to persuade people that that market only exists because it's supply and demand, and if there is no demand, people will stop producing. But of course, there are all those folks who still believe in all of that stuff and who will enjoy serving up exotic creatures on a dinner plate. I can remember,
Right.
I remember visiting a restaurant with my wife once in a particular country, and we looked on the menu and it said something about a dog, and the waiter didn't really speak much English, but my wife said, how can you have that? I mean, I like dog. He said, "Oh, good, we have dog back. Yeah, how do you like your dog? You how medium rare?" And I mean, he was deadly serious. I mean, they actually serve dogs. I mean, dog meat, real animals. It still happens on a relatively regular basis, and the dreadful torture that bears in certain countries are subjected to because of the value of bears that are grown strictly for medicinal products or for meat. It's and kept in tiny cages, or those that are, as I've seen myself, be it walking through some exotic market in a faraway place where there's a snake charmer
Mm-hmm.
with
Mm.
some couple of cobras dancing around, and I mean, it's pitiful. I mean, I won't. But the last thing I would ever do is give any of those guys money. If
Right.
or if you take their animal, they will get another one. And I mean, they cut the fangs out so they can't. I mean, it's all a bit of a fake, but those are terribly cruel and despicable examples of the ways to which humans will become worse than the worst of animals. Their behavior is despicable, cowardly, and predatory in a way that really does bad service to the animal kingdom as a whole, including our part in it. So I'm profoundly upset by it. And my immediate reaction would be, to follow a snake charmer home and,
Ooh.
armed with an appropriate weapon, shoot the guy in the head, or the guy keeping the bears in a tiny enclosure, or or keeping a lot of donkeys for huge overweight certain tourists from certain countries who will pile onto a tiny donkey and laugh and joke as it struggles to carry them up a hill. Again, something I've witnessed on more than one occasion and more than one holiday resort. And it's, again, I feel like I would just quite easily dispatch one of those dreadful, evil people who do that. Their argument
But
is, hey, it's a living. It's what I do. What
yeah,
else
and
can
it's
I
not going
do?
to stop the whole
I,
movement.
I sadly think not, but my advice is don't give the guys any money. If there's nothing in it for them financially, they will stop doing it. And eventually, it will, hopefully those animals would not be born in the first place or not be caught in the wild in the first place. If it's only because people
Or
pay
breeded.
money, and therefore some of the tourists who pay these guys, it's just as bad as, you are aiding and abetting the continuity of shocking ill treatment and subjugation of animals in a way that is, I think, utterly belittling. It's inhuman for us to do that, but some of us do. Whether 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 we're actually actively doing it or just supporting them by giving people money for a donkey ride. It's
Right. Or the circus or whatever.
Well, yes, but as
Should.
I've said, in my country at least, circuses don't have wild animals. That's long since phased out. We don't do that anymore. We realize the iniquity of taking animals on a traveling circus fair in a cage and taking them around the country and trotting them out. That's that's been gone for many decades.
Yeah.
It may still exist in some countries, but it not in my country. You know, we generally speaking have realized how awful that is to do such a thing. Having said that, you know, we have traveling circuses, one quite local to us that is based in this part of the world, but in fact travels around Britain, you know, with a big top that they set up and do a few days in different towns in different parts of the country. And yes, they have animals, but they're horses, and they're horses being ridden by expert equestrians, as a rule, who 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 ride the horses. That's about the only animal you see. But of course, they have clowns. They have a whole lot of other traditional circus acts. And most of those circus performers, in fact, come from countries like Romania, where the circus is a very vital and viable part of entertainment. But you know, they come here because it's an opportunity to actually perform, because we still do have circuses, but we don't have wild animals, and nor do we have Siegfried and Bloody Roy. You know,
No.
that's
And we,
that doesn't happen here. You know,
yeah.
no making money out of showing animals off or showing your trying to persuade people how big and tough you are because you can handle wild animals. Well, forget it. That's just despicable. I was once invited to go to see Siegfried and Roy when I was in Las Vegas, and it was some relative who said, "Oh, you know, would you like to come and see the show? You know, they'd love you to go along and see the show." And you know, my immediate reaction was to let fly with a very aggressive response, and I thought there's no point because they just don't get it. I just
Right.
said it's very kind offer, but thank you. No, I'll be washing what's left of my hair that night, so thank you. No,
Right. Right.
but
Right.
you know, my instinct was to scream and shout at the guy and tell him to tell his uncle what a bastard he was for doing that
Yeah.
in the first place. But I didn't.
Ill-informed. I think I want to thank you for this because I think interviews like this will enlighten some folks for sure.
Well, hopefully most don't need enlightening. They kind of feel the same as what I would hope are the majority of people these days, that animals should be treated, first of all, with dignity and respect. And secondly, don't fall into the trap of taking on the responsibility of having something that you call a pet, because that's in itself a little, you know, a little bit of a bad way to describe it. It's entering into a relationship, into a bond between human and animal that is quite a responsibility. And I think you do need to always stop and think about it. You know, whether it's a rabbit or a goldfish or a snake or a lizard or a cat or a dog or something big like a horse. You know,
Yeah.
it's you've really got to think about what it all entails, and are you really prepared for perhaps 20 years of your life to give the necessary time, support, and comfort to a wild or to a domesticated wild creature that really does depend on you solely for everything. So I think, you know, in all cases, stop and think before you buy, before you undertake any of that stuff. Yeah,
Commitment.
it's a toughie. Yeah, it's absolutely about commitment and about respect.
Yeah.
Anyway, I must leave you because I've got to get packed. I'm off to 5 past 5 in the morning to go to the airport to fly to do a couple of shows in Germany. So I got to
Ah,
get going.
well, Tag and Danke for the interview and have a great time. Thank you.
Okay, pleasure. Nice to talk to you. Take care. Bye bye now.
All right. Bye-bye.